Hi, welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers at VMware. And today joined by Gerrit. Welcome back, Gerrit. Why don't you just introduce yourself and let people know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Glad to be back on the show. My name is Gerrit Lehr. I'm a principal cloud strategist with a team called the Worldwide Multi-Cloud Architecture and Strategy. So basically, my job is to help our customers, but also mainly our partners, basically be successful on this whole multi-cloud thing, right? So this starts with multi-cloud strategy, and then from the partners lens, how to be successful on that journey, how to build, monetize, and productize services that make customers happy with the multi-cloud.
Yeah, and we only win if partners win. So it's very important to have your team supporting them and delivering them the enablement and strategy and kind of pricing and packaging information that they need and competitive information and stuff. So really great to talk to you. And today we're going to be talking about Aria, which is the old vRealize Operations, for those who don't know, rebranded into the Aria suite and Aria portfolio. But we're going to be talking about something which is probably, I think, one of the biggest opportunity areas for our service providers, which is around managed services and what you can do with reporting services. So this hasn't been new. I mean, I consider management and reporting to be kind of part of the cloud basics. Getting visibility on what you're consuming and the performance and capacity and availability of it all. Pretty kind of basic stuff, really. And how does this kind of evolve then for our cloud providers? What's their kind of stake in the ground starting point, and what can Aria really do for them?
Yeah, let's maybe start with a bit of a misconception around what Aria or Aria, whatever it's really pronounced, is, right? So you're totally right. It's like everything that has been in the former vRealize portfolio. So that's vRealize Operations, Automation, Network Insight, Log Insight. That has all been rebranded to Aria, right? But there is more stuff in there, right? For example, there is what we used to call Cloud Health, right? It's now called VMware Cost, powered by Cloud Health. And there is, for example, also the former Wavefront, then later Tons of Observability, and now Aria Operations for Applications product, right? So there's other bits and pieces of the portfolio that have been brought together under that umbrella. That's the first important thing, right? But probably even more important, this is not just a marketing rebranding kind of exercise, right? We have layered some additional products on top that actually help bring all these solutions and the different management disciplines that these solutions enable, help bring them together and actually make them manageable in the context of multi-cloud, pretty much, right? So we have additional solutions like Aria Hub and Aria Graph, Aria Guardrails, Aria Migration, and so on, right? And all of that, I think, kind of gives an answer to your second question as well. Why do partners need that? Like reporting, metering, management has always been like a core practice for a service provider, right? But really, the whole idea behind Aria is all around how do you do these kind of things in a multi-cloud context, right? So if you think about only the cloud service provider's data center cloud environment, you could probably get away with just using, former vRealize Operations, now Aria Operations, to manage all that and provide reporting and numbers and troubleshooting to your customers. That's all fine, right? But in the current state and the future state of IT, where customers are likely to consume our partners' cloud services, besides native cloud services, besides edge and private and whatever combination of cloud services, you probably need more than just the operations part, right? You'll need automation, you'll need costs, you need application insights, and you need to bring all of that together, right? And that's basically what Aria is doing. Yeah. And when we look at this whole idea behind managing the whole multi-cloud world on behalf of our customers, it'll quickly become obvious that there is a huge opportunity to provide all sorts of managed services around this and with those tools. And this is basically what I've been working on the last couple of months, where we are currently launching a pretty extensive blog series for one blog post every week for 10 consecutive weeks, really to explain partners, okay, this is what Aria is, and this is how you actually build managed services around that to provide value to your customers in the context of multi-cloud.
Yeah, I think that so the key kind of takeaways there are customers are in multi-cloud already. Many of them will continue to expand their multi-cloud landscape and operations. Cloud providers today tend to be, and certainly the cloud providers I've spoken to tend to be more focused on what's in their data center and realizing their investment in their infrastructure first. And that's fine, but if a customer comes to you and they've already got existing multi-cloud deployments, then from a customer perspective, it makes more sense to talk to the cloud provider about managing those as well, because then you're removing all those operational silos and you've just got one single point to talk to. And obviously you get the benefit of actually being able to talk to someone, which is a huge benefit, and having a support chain there. And then I guess this is an evolution of using your own infrastructure in the cloud provider data center, the cloud provider providing transparency for that, and then also building on those additional managed services to complement where the customer is short on skills and resources, but needs, I know, various databases, various kind of applications that maybe they don't have the skills for today in terms of management, but they've got, if you like, the programming skills to actually utilize those. Typical example that would be data science, for example, where they need the infrastructure and they've got the data scientists. So I think that's probably a relevant example. So I think from an Aria perspective, then the message is this kind of totality of the suite that we have, and to start layering on capabilities as you go for your customers. Where's the starting point, Gerrit? How do people actually get into this?
Yeah, and that really depends on where you're coming from, right? And you brought up the example of cloud providers, which is target audience for this show today, really come from a place where they tend to only manage workloads in their own data center, probably starting with vRealize operations, which is now Aria operations, right? And maybe there is some Aria operations for networks, which is the former VRNI product, and Aria operations for logs, which is the former VRLI product, log inside. Yeah. So that's probably where I want to say 95% of our partners are today, right? They use this either for their internal operations, because like their cloud service is a managed service in and of itself, right? Or they use that to provide value-added services to their customers. So, operating system management, performance management, capacity management. So everything that comes on top of the technical cloud service. Now, on the other hand, yes, a lot of partners are going to grow into that area where they're also going to manage their customers' native cloud environments. But more often than not, there already is a practice in that partners organization that does that, right? It's not necessarily the team that we as VMware get exposed to a lot and that we talk to a lot, but there are a lot of partners that have, native Azure practices or specialized in GCP, in AWS, in whatever native cloud. And those two teams, from my experience, don't necessarily talk together too much, right? So there is generally the skill to provide multi-cloud services, but those teams don't speak the same language, not the same people. They use different tools, right? So very likely the Azure team will be focused on native Azure management tools like Azure Monitor, for example, Azure Application Insights. And then you might have another team, the AWS team, that uses all sorts of AWS CloudWatch solutions, AWS X-Ray, whatever the native tool for that specific use case is, right? Now, from a business perspective, that does not necessarily make sense. You have redundant, I don't want to say skills, because every cloud is different, but you definitely have redundant tools, right? Because they all do basically the same, just in a proprietary way and in the context of each respective cloud ecosystem. And with the Aria solution, we can reduce a lot of that redundancy on the tool level, right? So you can use Aria operations, for example, to build dashboards across all clouds, whether it's private cloud, hosted cloud, public cloud, AWS, Azure, Google, whatever, right? Yeah. So we'll still rely on native hyperscale services, and we'll still, create some costs on that level, but not to the extent that you have it when you use all the tools and all the things separately across clouds. So we can really help the partner get some synergies there across clouds and help those separate teams speak the same language, use the same tools, right?
Yeah.
This is probably the first thing when we talk only on the operational level. So everything that used to be realized operation.
You raise a really good point that there's kind of two things to think about. One is the tools consolidation aspect, which clearly there's, the problem with vendor management systems and vendor monitoring systems is they're typically very specific to the solution they're providing. And it's been a classic problem for operations centers for years, where to be an operator on some of the larger kind of telcos, for example, you need to learn about 80 or 90 different element management systems, and that's just craziness. So in cloud, obviously the visibility and focus is on these major providers as well as their data infrastructure. So having that tool that can potentially fill, it possibly won't do as good a job as the EMS, but it provide a good enough job for you to utilize for your customers. But I think importantly, you mentioned something really important there. When we're talking about multi-cloud, we're talking about Azure, AWS, VMware, etc. We're talking different networks, different security, different architectures, different everything in all of these clouds. And the challenge is that cloud providers have created these silos of skills and resources, but they haven't joined them together. So actually, from a business perspective, multi-cloud should be talking the same language really across all of these. And this provides an opportunity for cloud providers to start unifying those teams in a more coherent manner, which I think from a business level is definitely, what you want to do. You want that overarching umbrella over these different silos. So you've got visibility and control, and then you can really start addressing customers' multi-cloud needs.
Yeah, and what's super important is what you just mentioned doesn't only go broad across different clouds, it also goes deep across different disciplines, right? Like when we look at the Aria portfolio, we have operations to basically monitor and log everything. We have application operations, which is the application layer where we have traces, flows, all these kind of distributed monitoring practices. But we also have automation, right? So deploying everything, GitOps capabilities. We have network insights, we have log insights, we have cost management with the former Cloud Health product, right?
Yeah.
So these different disciplines have like handover points as well, where they don't necessarily talk the same language. And to be quite honest, we had the same problem in our tools, right? So if you look at whatever cloud instance, let's say a virtual machine, and you look at that exact same entity in Aria operations and Aria operations for network or VRNI, they will be called a different thing. They'll have a different ID, right? And multiply that by 5, and you kind of get the complexity of how disconnected this was in the past, right? And this is not exclusive to the Aria portfolio, or was not. That's the same in other tools as well, right? And this is really where the addition of VMware Aria Graph comes in. So Graph is basically sort of a meta data store and a way to query an API to get those informations in a correlated way, right? So we take all the information from VRNI or Aria for networks, from Aria for operations, for automation, and we give them a unique ID, and we bring them all together and expose them through that API, so that when you look at that one object, you have all the information from all the different tools across all the different disciplines, right? And then you can apply that same logic across different clouds, right? So this does not only work with vSphere virtual machines, it works with Azure virtual machines, it works with AWS EC2 instances, works with Google Compute Engine instances, right? And I think this could give the listeners an idea of how much complexity Aria can actually help reduce or address from the operator's perspective, and then consequently from the managed services practice of the provider, where you really have a lot of synergies, where you can really just work in a leaner way, right?
Yeah, and as we're looking, you raised a really good point. Aria Graph is, it is the way to kind of visualize and obtain the information from the different Aria tool sets and beyond, right, into other APIs and stuff. So I think that's really interesting view for operators to have. But also one of the things I'm very conscious of is when we talk about hybrid cloud, what we're starting to see kind of evolving is not just like hybrid cloud being multi-cloud, which is typically what it is today, right? But actually being hybrid applications. And that means you might be running a data silo somewhere, a processing engine another place, a load balancer in another place, a web front end in another place, and really taking advantage of the regional distribution of cloud and also the different applications that are available, which would optimize your delivery of your application. And that's becoming, I think, as new projects are starting to kick up, it's not obviously going to count for legacy because that's pretty much set in whatever cloud it's in. But for newer applications and new projects that customers are looking at now, true hybrid cloud at an application level is actually very possible and provides some very unique business opportunities, but without having an operations capability or functional managed service to be able to get that cross-cloud correlation, you really don't have a full end-to-end view of the service, and that's critical when you're looking at the application management.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also where one of the additional Aria products comes in, which is Aria migration, right? So this sort of brings together the former VRNI, so Network Insight product, which allows operators or the partner to really analyze what kind of applications the customer has and how these components interact with one another and how the traffic flows and how bandwidth intensive that is, right? And then it allows for like a planning process using machine learning AI to actually help the customer, or in that case the partner, with workload placement strategies. What impact on cost does it have if I move workloads from one cloud to another, right? And then actually execute that migration to the extent that HCX can support it, right? So this is another great example of, hey, we are actually now capable of actually helping customers be cloud smart, right? Putting workloads and components and applications into the right cloud that is the best fit for that workload. So we can technically do that. We have all the tools in the world to do that. Now we actually have the management intelligence to make those right decisions and successfully execute on that, right? And that also goes, as you said, pretty closely into the application level. We need to understand not just the physical network, the physical infrastructure components and the virtual ones. We need to understand the actual application and service layer of that, where there is, microservices, Kubernetes in between, various containers and ports coming and going, a lot of interdependency, and an additional level of networking, right? Where we have things like API gateways, service mesh, container ingress, application load balancers, on top of the multi-cloud network, which is already complex enough, right? When you have like private and public connectivity, you have MPLS, AWS Direct Connect, Azure Express Route, and all the private cloud stuff that we still have. And the Aria idea really helps managed service and professional service staff of our partners get all those information, get the right information, and then make meaningful decisions and support their customers on that journey, right? So yeah, the networking piece and the whole application layer brings an additional dimension of complexity on top of those various hybrid and multi-cloud scenarios, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that look at Aria, obviously building a managed service organization or professional service organization is not a particularly easy thing to do. I mean, you can capitalize on your existing skills and resources pretty quickly, but then you're going to need to expand the scope and possibly pull in partners to assist. But just starting at, bringing on board a customer using Aria operations for an assessment, to understand the capacity, the performance, the state of that customer environment, and then using Network Insight to understand, and fantastic tool for kind of mapping out the complexity of organization, the security posture, the flows of information. So you can actually talk to the customer and say that we're going to migrate these sets of applications in this manner. Customer may think they know exactly what those applications are composed of, and you can demonstrate intelligence and skill by actually providing like, well, actually, this is what it's, relying on, and this is what it's feeding into. So getting those application groups ready for migration and potentially just starting with a professional service or, assessment capability and selling that is probably a great place to start for getting experience in the tool set.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this depends on the scope of clouds and services that the partner wants to deliver, right? But before you can actually help your customers plan and execute application migration and workload placement projects, you need to start with preparing the actual destination environments, right? So this is usually what we call a cloud landing zone, where we have like, a set of guardrails and policies and identity access management that sort of, put some fences around what's possible in the cloud and keep it within the boundaries of what's compliant and, desirable from a governance kind of way, right? And this is depending on whether this is a greenfield or brownfield approach, but this is probably where a lot of partners want to start, or at least support their customers, right? Build the proper multi-cloud landing zone, which is what we can do with Aria guardrails, right? And then, maybe even avoid the customer going directly to the AWS or Azure or Google console and doing stuff there, but instead, relying on a managed service catalog that the partner maintains and operates, right? With like services that, the provider can take care of and can provide managed services for, right? And once that foundation is built, that's when we can start, managing the actual infrastructure, especially on the private cloud worlds, but also in public clouds, right? Someone still needs to take care of, performance capacity, operating system updates, and so on.
Yeah.
And then usually the next layer, and this is the structure that I also follow in this managed services Monday with Aria block series. That's then when managed applications come in, right? When we want to understand traffic patterns, the application components to actually make smart workload placement decisions, plan migrations, plan repatriation of workloads, which, with all the legal stuff going on, the whole sovereign cloud ideas might become a super important topic as well, right? We need to think about, hey, maybe this workload needs to go back out again, needs to go somewhere else, to a sovereign cloud, to private cloud, whatever, right? So this can go in all directions. And and from there's just a whole range of additional services on top, right? Cloud financial management, managed security, and so on.
Yeah, you raise a good point there. I mean, the whole kind of workload mobility play is one of the key areas of the Data Act that the EU is looking at. And they will legislate that, this has got to be something that, cloud providers allow and provide. So getting rid of egress charges, I think, is the first port of call. And as a cloud provider, you need to be able to support whatever endpoints or landing zones those workloads are going to run in. And, providing that coverage across those multiple clouds is going to become much more important as we go forward. So you mentioned Management Mondays, was it?
Managed Services Monday, yeah.
Managed Service Monday, right? Okay, so we've got a competitor now to feature Fridays.
Yeah, I actually stole that idea from you, so it's.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So let's talk about the Managed Service Mondays and what is it, and what's it going to cover, and how can cloud providers benefit from it?
Yeah, sure. So it's basically a series of blog posts that get launched every Monday, as the name suggests, right? And really aims to help the readers, and those are our partners, but also maybe internal service providers of direct customers, right? Help them understand how to build a managed services practice around multi-cloud using the various Aria components. And then in that context, also understand what those components, what those solutions are, and how to benefit from that, right? So we started probably 1.5 months ago with like an intro on the whole series and on what those Aria components are and how this all came into place. And then, as I just said, the second week was about how to build a managed multi-cloud landing zone, a service catalog to expose cloud services and resources to customers for consumption. Then we looked at GitOps capabilities, because we need to populate and maintain that service catalog in a scalable and automated way, which is all about automation, infrastructure as code report codes, and so on, right? And now we're in the middle of actually walking through all those different value-added managed services disciplines. So managed infrastructure, managed applications, managed networking, which is super complex. So this will actually be 2 blog posts across 2 weeks. And then managed security, cloud financial management. And then the last week would probably be around the whole Aria Hub, Aria Graph thing of bringing this all together, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not like we're going super deep on all the details. That would be too much to cover. So we're talking about like a reading time of I don't know, between 8 and 10 minutes per week. That should help the reader understand, okay, this is the solution, this is the problem I can solve, and these are the base and value-added managed services that I can build on top if I want to expand my practice to that area, right?
Yeah, okay. And from an Aria footprint perspective, I mean, it's actually quite surprising that most of our providers have actually got Aria. So I think this is a case of like expanding that scope and looking at how you can perhaps do in your infrastructure, starting at the basics, like I said, the infrastructure monitoring, going up a point in your Flex core and then delivering more advanced monitoring services with Aria operations or the management packs, right? The application packs. Mm-hmm. How much of, so there's monitoring and then providing managed services for monitoring, i.e. Mr. Customer, here's a report. I assume you've got the skills to interpret that report and get on with it. And then there's monitoring and management where you could do some additional content to the report, make recommendations, and then obviously provide the services to implement those recommendations, but provide some kind of analytics around the reports as well. And how does a cloud provider, start looking at, doing this potentially without the skills that they need to do this today? What's the best approach in trying to build this practice when basically you've got a VM team, you've got a separate network team, you've got a separate storage team, you've got a separate AWS team, Azure team, mm-hmm. and the cloud is about kind of gluing that all together. So how would you suggest, or does the blog post kind of explain to start doing this?
Yeah, very good point. And so actually, though, this blog series focuses on a couple of things. The first one is, let's understand what managed services actually means, because it means different things to different people, right? And I use the terms base managed service and value-added managed service just to distinguish between different perceptions that the term might trigger with people, right? Mm. So the first thing you want to do, and we've been discussing that with partners for years, is establish a base managed service. And in the area of managed infrastructure, that would actually be standing up a vRealize operations or Aria operations platform, like the tools that allow the customer to do self-service management of their infrastructure, right? So it's exactly the same user experience and level of managed service that you would get from a hyperscaler, right?
Yeah.
If you need a management tool for AWS, you log into the AWS console and you just leverage AWS CloudWatch. It is a managed service in terms of that AWS operates the CloudWatch platform and tool for you, but it's not a value-added service because no one at AWS will do updating or capacity management of your virtual machines for you, right? Yeah. The first step is always, okay, establish that base managed service. And when we talk about, the CSP hosting program, we look a little bit into, okay, what do I need to do to build that base managed service? It's, instantiating the Aria solutions, maybe integrating it with other things and keeping it up to date, licensing it, all that kind of stuff, right? What does it take to build a base managed service that allows customers to do self-service, right? And then the next step, which requires, additional skills from the provider, is usually building value-added services on top, right? So they will very likely have the skills to operate Aria operations. If they don't, they can leverage the SaaS offering that we have, right, through the CSP SaaS motion, where we actually do the management of the base tool set. But at some point, customers are going to demand value-added services, right? And this is then where people know how to leverage Aria operations to do operating system management, capacity management, performance management, create customized dashboards, reports, and then, of course, scale that practice across different clouds because it's the same tool across every cloud. That's the idea behind Aria, right? And it's really, it's a progression that partners can mature through, right? They can start with the base managed service, and then once they have an understanding of what's in demand from their customers, they can start building that skills and selling additional value-added services. And that is I think on the infrastructure side, it's pretty straightforward. But when we look at the application layer, it becomes way more complex, right? So when we talk about managed applications, like this could be everything, right? There is 1,000,001 applications and application components out there, way too diverse from the customer's point of view to actually standardize on a set of value-added managed services for applications from the provider's view, right? So again, the idea here is the provider starts with offering the Aria operations for applications platform so that the customer has application observability capabilities in a self-service way. And maybe the provider has skills to provide database as a service, or I don't know, managed SAP, managed Kubernetes, managed Apache web services, whatever, right? A limited set that the provider can standardize on and skill up their people and then, start setting those services. But also they can learn from the observability platform what's actually in demand from customers. What else are they managing by themselves so that they get an understanding of where to invest, where to build additional capabilities, and then offer additional value-added managed application offerings later on, right?
That's a great point. Yeah, so you actually learn the behavior of your customers and what they actually need. Okay, that's cool. So Managed Service Monday is on the VMware Cloud Provider blogs, yep. And I'll put the link below. Basically, for the kind of call to action now for cloud providers is just to get started, follow the blog series, learn about kind of providing a baseline managed service, a base managed service like we've discussed, and then look at the value add and look what you can do, but more importantly, kind of understand what your customers need so you can meet their needs straight away.
Yeah, exactly. And also like one of the aims for me personally was to help the partner understand how to make a smart platform choice about their managed services business, right? I mean, of course, there are many tools that can do similar things to what bits and pieces of the Aria portfolio can do, right? Mm. But you got to think long term here, right? You need to understand that your managed service business is going to evolve, and think ahead of what's the art of the possible, what might be in demand in the future, and does that one platform that I might consider actually have the capabilities to still cater for that business, 3-5 years down the road, right? Mm. So putting a lot of emphasis on how do you actually integrate all those Aria pieces. Of course, there is Hub and Graph on top, but there are other things which are super valuable to partners, right? So we just recently published the Aria Operations Management Pack for Aria Operations for Applications. So basically bringing all the former tons of observability application layer information into the former VROPS product, right? Which is super important when you want to tackle the problem from two sides, from the infrastructure side and from the application side, right? So I think when partners make those decisions, they need to understand like where the touch points between those solutions are, what kind of teams in my managed services practices would use what kind of tool, right? You will have managed infrastructure teams, which have different people on it than managed application, managed network teams, right? We want to understand where those teams meet, what kind of tools can actually exchange what kind of information, and then how this, helps you leverage synergies, not just today, but 3-5 years down the road, right? This is why I'm, putting a lot of emphasis on actually, here's how you integrate these things, right? Here's how your teams can collaborate on a complex problem, which you will have in a multi-cloud managed services business, because multi-cloud is inherently complex, right?
Yeah, I mean, that whole kind of service view and service mapping, I mean, wow, that goes back years in my experience, trying to understand the relationships between different applications, how the data is being passed across, how to measure the performance on that, the transaction latencies, etc. And pinning that all together is, for potentially hundreds of thousands of applications is incredibly difficult. So that's why I say, like, maybe, you can do the infrastructure one now, you can offer the self-service now, establish that baseline, start looking at what customers are deploying, start with the management packs, right? Databases and things like that, easy wins, low-hanging fruit. But then when you start looking at the application side of things, it'd probably be better to work with the customer on, whatever projects they're working on, and then to really investigate how you could use Aria operations, where you'd need to integrate to, what data you'd need to actually pull up into that service level view. And perhaps that's one way of doing it. The other way is, hey, we've got a bunch of guys who are great on Kubernetes, so we want to just provide Kubernetes kind of managed service, full managed service view. So I think there's options available to providers to look to pursue this route.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what from my point of view makes managed services business hard to scale and sometimes expensive to deliver is, I mean, it's of course the skills, but it's like more than that. It's always the touch points, right? The intersections between different teams with different skills, or between the partner and the customer, right? This is where things break. This is where things stop and become slow and expensive and, you know, unsatisfying for the customer, right? And you know, in the blog series, there are, you know, a whole bunch of videos, not from myself, just, you know, from other folks that know more about the solutions than I do, of how do you tackle a problem from two sides, right? So there's one example of, you know, a managed services person gets called up and, you know, the user says, look, my VM is slow. What's happening, right? So obviously he or she thinks this is a VM problem. So they look into that, and from the main tool, which is Aria Operations, they can actually see that from the integration with the Aria Network Insights tool, they can actually see that there is a networking problem, a BGP problem, which normal infrastructure person wouldn't be able to fix, right? Because BGP apparently is a pretty complex and important network protocol. But you know, the operator of the infrastructure now knows, okay, this is a BGP problem. And when I ping my colleague in the network team, I can tell him or her, look, I have this problem. By the way, this is a BGP problem on that and that, you know, whatever network entity, virtual, physical, switch, router. Please look into that, which is way more effective than just saying, hey, something's broken, please look into that, right? So, and this is really where bringing those tools together, exchanging information between the tools is super valuable, even though there, you know, very likely is not always that one person that can fix everything on the whole stack. It's probably rare that you will have someone that's an application specialist and a BGP specialist. Yeah, it happens often. Those people are rare.
Yeah, I mean, it is about identifying those, let's call them performance issues, right? And getting that full visibility end to end. But particularly, it's also about proactively understanding what customers are going to be impacted. So you can, you know, one customer's called you up, but it doesn't mean the rest of them aren't sitting there scratching their heads trying to work out what's wrong with their applications. So, you know, all about the customer experience and pulling that capability in as well. All right, Gerrit. Well, listen, thanks a lot for kind of introducing Managed Service Mondays, and I'll put a link to the blog below, and hopefully we'll get some feedback from service providers on how they're finding it and help you potentially tune later issues.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Guy.
Cheers, Gerrit. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.